from Christian demonology to Frankenstein to B-genre films and beyond, the monster allegorically shows up to demonstrate the uncertainty of the future and the barbarity of humanity.
It brings on gender troubles and uncanny mixtures.
As an anomalous entity that is situated as a phenomenon of bordering, the monster is neither an individual nor a species.
The monster embodies an incompatible
A fear of the
mixture
alien other.
that haunts anthropocentric discourses of purity as their abject.
The monstrous hybrid creature falls away from the human through an unforeseeable repetition of abominable transgressions and incalculable possibilities of change.
In affective and non-human terms, the monster has reappeared as a figure for thought and the unthinkable.
The monster has the capacity to destabilize humanity and affect the subject, alluding to that which inhabits the limits of knowability.
However, what is crucial for an ethics of care for the other is not just what the subject can do with the monster, but how the monster can transform the subject.
We can become shapeshifters and transient vibrations, irreducible hybridization, and treacherous creatures of liminal dimensionalities that are strange to ours. We can become fairies animated by fantastic intensities that have not been shaped by a mechanism model of nature, but that unleash cataclysms from which no conclusions or resolutions can be drawn.
The monster is made of the debris gathered up by Walter Benjamin's Angel of History as it moves backwards into the future.
As a transformation of unverifiable, unnatural alliances that rebel through a pleasure that alters dominant power structures, the momentary flashing of the unnameable monster unsettles the position of a feminized other without subjugating her pleasure to oppressive limitations.
Monstrous becomings emphasize the force of that which is never considered the human subject and the agency of
Objects,
objects
the feminized other,
which have been wounded by and subjected to dominant masculinist notions of force.
however, the monster can always be recaptured by the system.
Even as the monster is an abomination of categories, scientific discourses invent new pathological categories in order to tame monstrous unknowns into taxonomical hierarchies for the justification of domination over them.
When an entity arises that cannot fit any known categories, often a new category is simply made to encapsulate the entity.
Yet, even still, every act of framing has constitutive outsides.
So, what we suggest from this proliferation is the dissolving of categories,
Unraveling of any system claiming final mastery, exhausting cataloging, a settled reading of reality.
evoking the monster attempts at a dérive without destination, a queer form of futurity revisioned through lenses that cannot be constrained within a space-time continuum.
It repudiates the violence that sanctions a repetition of sameness, that calls to be conserved and preserved, instead opening up to a repetition of difference.
The monster's mutability through this repetition of difference proliferates an uncontrollable undecidability that cannot be restrained by a measurable economy of exchange.
Spilling out of the confines of definition, the monster can be described as what Deleuze and Guattari called unheard of becomings.
Not unheard of because they have never been heard before, but because they cannot be heard through established majoritarian discourses.
As anomalous unknown mixtures, they are irrepresentable within the phallocentric logic of legibility.
Emerging from incommensurable heterogeneity, becomings proliferate through an encounter with alterity.
They concern not what structures relationships between two reified entities, but with the way in which they are transformed through unnatural relations.
As non-goal-oriented piecings together of incomplete alien letters remote from tangible proofs, Becomings are non-actualizable, always a process.
They are already gone and yet to come back.
They are unknowable and unspeakable movement of tearing, breaking, cutting together apart.
Becomings open up the possibility of time as uncertain, open-ended aporia, and undecidable repeatability.
They poetically recontextualize the pathological and free it from teleological bonds and signifying grand narratives of regulation.
The monster, as becoming, is an interruption to the alleged continuum of normalcy that destabilizes the regime of straight time and the overdetermination of space,
The law
nature.
and culture.
As Michel Foucault writes in Abnormal, the monster is the transgression of natural limits, the transgression of classifications, of the table, and the law as a table.
So the monster lurks in the dark corners of
Science,
medicine,
law,
religion,
philosophy.
but in evoking the extreme sensory perception that can transform one's philosophical perception of the world, the monster inhabits the realm of poetry.
Therefore, if alterity is the basis of ethics, as according to Emmanuel Levinas, we can say that the monster is a ethical being made of the excesses of existence that makes the possibilities for relation through the indeterminacy and uncertainty of its unknown mixtures.
While the designation monster has been used as justification for considering certain colonized and racialized populations as expendable,
leading to abusive extraction of resources and rampant abuse of the earth,
these anthropocentric hegemonic practices have instigated a monstrous return, the unnameable, unknowable possibility of the future to come.
but in the face of all this, how can we embody the monster for collective survival in heterogeneous coalitions that repeat with difference, rather than a rejection of the monster in forever failing attempts to eradicate the foreign body?
Can we make subterranean bonds of solidarity for an ethics of care at the end of the world? Something like an affirmation of difference from communities of monsters?
A spectral return of the repressed, a mutant assemblage of relations.
Let's not forget that it was precisely the idea of the monster with a companion that put Victor Frankenstein over the edge.
Evoking the fantastical, fragmented, allegorical allusions of the monster.
A spectral return of the repressed mutant assemblage of relations
Tends to historicity, constrained within a space-time continuum.
It repudiates the violence that sanctions a repetition of sameness that calls to be conserved and preserved instead of opening up to a repetition of difference.
The monster's mutability through this repetition of difference proliferates an uncontrollable undecidability that cannot be restrained by a measurable economy of exchange.
I'm reading the same thing. That holds it accountable to the other in its sheer indeterminacy. The pages have numbers as a nameless horror of haunting echoes that, spoken in unpredictable and unidentifiable imaginary rhythms that vibratorily overlap, monstrosity becomes a praxis of thinking and doing together for dealing with incoherent telepathic, interstellar entanglements and predictable unknowns as a disidentification with the system of which they are abject and minoritized.
These monsters are demonic assemblages of abominable loves that cannot be reduced to a pathological stage, resisting to be taxonomically naturalized and pinned down to an essence.